That incredibly serene music was written by Lili Boulanger, who, like everyone on this program, was born at the end of the 1800s and lived into the 1900s, which was a very interesting time in music history. So if you think about the Romantic period as expanding in every way for as long as it could, it was getting richer, louder, more luscious. The harmonies were becoming more and more chromatic. The expression was becoming more and more over the top. And finally, when you push hard enough and you push those boundaries far enough out, they fall down. And so the bubble burst. We got to the point where we had 4-hour operas by Wagner and hour-long symphonies by Mahler. That's pushing the extremes of chromaticism and expression to its natural breaking point. And that's what happened at the end of the 1800s. And so that left a bit of a vacuum. And different people explored different ways out of that vacuum. And today we're going to look at what women composers were doing at the time. It was not easy to be a woman composer then. There were a lot of barriers. It was hard to get published. It was hard to get a teacher sometimes. Some of these women were held back by their husbands or their parents. So those are tough issues, and we're all thinking about that a lot these days with social justice sweeping our country. So it's a good time to look at this. I want to thank Kim Wickland for the idea for this program and for commissioning it. I'm really excited that you're here to listen. So back to Lili for just a moment. Lili had a very famous older sister. So it was an extremely musical family. The grandparents were musical. The parents were both singers. Actually, Lili and Nadia's mother was a singer, and she fell in love with and married her voice teacher at the Paris Conservatory. And then they had these two daughters who were prodigiously talented. The family was friends with Gabriel Fauré, a noted contemporary composer. And he came over once to socialize with the family and discovered that Lili had perfect pitch at 2 years old. And by the time she was 3, she could sing 150 songs in perfect tune. And Nadia was, of course, also very talented. Nadia went on to be quite famous as a teacher. She became the teacher of people like Copland and even Quincy Jones and Astor Piazzolla. She was quite a figure. And in fact, a lot of the women that I'm playing tonight studied with Nadia Boulanger in Paris. Nadia Boulanger tried 4 times to win the Prix de Rome, which was a composition prize that was given at the Paris Conservatory. And 4 times she didn't win, and she got so disillusioned and sort of frustrated with that she stopped trying. Lili tried once at 19, worked herself into a sort of a nervous frenzy while she was performing and had to withdraw. Applied again the next year with her piece, her cantata Faust et Hélène, and won at age 19, and she was the first woman to win. This is an important prize. It was given every year, and that was a real ceiling breaker. So Lili was an incredibly important figure. She did not live very long at all. It's shocking. She died at 24. She was ill her whole life. She had some stomach issues. We think now that she might have had Crohn's disease, actually. Nadia carried the torch for her, and I'm impressed with Nadia because even though Nadia desperately wanted to win that prize and couldn't, she never held it against Lili that she got it on her second try. So, fabulous story. So we turn now from Lili Boulanger, who you noticed probably sounded a lot like Debussy. She explored whole tone scales and lush harmonies, but not in the romantic sense, but in the sense of finding new scales. So after we exploded everything that being in a key had to offer in tonality, different people found different ways. So Debussy was a person who explored modality and whole tone scales, which lent the music kind of an exotic oriental flair. It was very in vogue at the time. Everyone was sort of obsessed with the Orient. So Lili and Nadia both fall into that line of how do we proceed about music now that we blew up tonality. Other composers did things rhythmically, like Stravinsky, for example, 1913, The Rite of Spring, incredible pounding, aggressive polyrhythms and sort of barbaric rhythms that people hadn't really explored before. And now let's listen to a piece by Ruth Crawford Seeger, who was known as an ultramodern. So she was writing in very dissonant language, serial music. She went on later in life, like Bartók and György Kurtag, she went on to become very interested in folk music. And that was an interest that came to her through her husband, Charles Seeger, who was also her composition teacher. So we have another theme already, falling in love with your teacher and marrying them. This piece by Ruth Crawford Seeger is phenomenal. This is one of her etudes. It's number 6. And even though all of the sounds that she uses are quite dissonant, we would listen to that sound and go, ooh, dissonant. And some people would say, ooh, ugly, harsh. These are major sevenths and minor ninths. And those are considered dissonant intervals. But you'll hear in her music how she makes them hauntingly beautiful. Our next 2 women are Mary Howe and Amy Cheney Beach. And I've grouped them together because they both wrote a nocturne. So even the word nocturne takes us back to the Romantic era. You can tell by the genre they're writing in that this is music that looks backward to the Romantic time, which was actually quite common in America. It wasn't until Charles Ives became known and heard that America really found its own individualistic 20th century voice. So a lot of people who were here in America writing music in the early 20th century were writing in a European style, and certainly Mary Howe and Amy Cheney Beach were doing that. Mary Howe is an American, so is Amy Cheney Beach. Mary Howe is from Richmond, Virginia. Amy Beach is from New Hampshire. And I think you'll hear just the lush romanticism in both of these nocturnes. As I said, the word nocturne makes us think of the Romantic era. John Field was an English composer, and he was the first person to write a piece and call it nocturne. And his pieces had, rolling accompanimental left hands and then beautiful melodies suspended over the top. Frédéric Chopin took that mold and for a while stayed within it, and then Chopin took the nocturne and took it into a much more virtuosic place over time. So he too, I guess, genres and musical development tends to expand and sometimes explode. Think of Beethoven with the piano sonatas. So Mary Howe's nocturne, again, that word haunting comes to mind. It flirts with two keys that have the same key signature, one minor and the other major, and definitely goes back and forth between the two. You can't really tell, is it a sorrowful piece or is it filled with radiant hope? It's kind of both at different times. Amy Beach's nocturne is way more dramatic than Mary Howe's, very overtly virtuosic. Amy Beach was a fantastic pianist. She was a very, very successful as a child, soloing with the Boston Symphony in her teens. She has an interesting story of being held back. Her husband was a surgeon, and I think he attended one of her concerts and decided maybe that he'd like to marry her. And he was a lot older than she was. And so the match went forward, but she was expected to sign an agreement saying that she would not teach because piano teaching was considered something that ladies did, and I think it kind of gave the impression that perhaps the husband in the couple wasn't being enough of a breadwinner. So he frowned on that. He didn't want her teaching, and he didn't want her on stage more than twice a year. Strange, since that's where he found her, was on stage. She says, in her own words, he was happy and I was content. We don't really know what that means. He did, as he was older than she was, he died and left her quite a few years left to experience life on her own. She went back to performing and she returned to her former name. She had performed during her married life as Mrs. H.H.A. Beach. So a different time and an example of being held back by a family member. So enjoy these two incredible nocturnes by Mary Howe and Amy Beach. Florence Price is a very interesting woman. She was an African-American woman who was born in Arkansas into a mixed-race family. Her father was an African-American dentist, very successful, and he apparently had clients that were both white people and black people, and he was a respected member of the community, and her mother was an amateur musician and provided Florence with her early training. Florence went on to be the first African-American woman to have a piece performed by a significant symphony orchestra. She was just extremely impressive. And the piece that I'm going to play for you today is a little ditty. It's called The Goblin and the Mosquito, and it's just a little character piece. This is not representative of her output. She didn't just write little pieces. She wrote symphonic repertoire and was an incredibly impressive composer. And fortunately, right now, she is receiving a lot more attention, as she deserves. Louise Talma was born in Arcachon, France. We know who her mother was, but we don't know who her father was. Her mother was Alma, and the two lived in France for a while, but also later moved to the States. And Louise went on to teach at the American Conservatory in Fontainebleau, and she is also, her opera Alcestiade was the first full-scale opera by an American woman that was staged in Europe. So she too is very impressive. I'm going to play one of her etudes, which is very dissonant, a little bit like Ruth Crawford Seeger's language, and highly serial. In fact, using tone rows at all times in this etude, which means a series of pitches that you write, no matter what happens, they still come in the same order. It's amazing to me how she writes music that is serial, and yet it has a logical, thoughtful sense of harmonic progression to it as well. It, like the Seeger, doesn't sound modern to me. Of course, it sounds more modern than other pieces I've played tonight, but I think you'll find that it's mischievous, has a lot of character, and as I said, it has a harmonic progression that makes sense, even though it's written in this serialist technique. Louise was a student of Nadia Boulanger, and actually the two of them were very close, and it's thought that Louise might have been in love with her. We're not really sure, but Nadia became a bit of a godmother to her and convinced her to convert to Roman Catholicism, and they had a very unique connection. So enjoy this piece by Louise Talma, which, interesting story, when I was a high school student, this etude was one of, you always had to present something from the Baroque, something from the classical, probably a Beethoven sonata, a romantic showy piece, and something new music. And so then they listed a number of things that you could choose from, and I chose this Louise Talma piece. So I played it when I was probably 17 and haven't played it since, and I've really enjoyed coming back to it. I hope you enjoy this. Madeline Dring was born a little bit later than some of our other women tonight. She was born in the 1920s and lived until the 70s. She's a British woman, and she was really interested in sounds like poulenc and jazz, and you will definitely hear that in this piece, which is just really groovy and jazzy, very lighthearted. Madeline tended towards small forms rather than large forms like Florence Price did. And she also wrote a lot of oboe music because she married the principal oboist of the London Symphony. So she ended up writing a lot of music for her husband. She studied at the Royal College of Music in London for many years as a small child, and I think you'll really enjoy this piece. She wrote a suite called Color Suite, and each movement has the name of a color in it and then a music word. So this is Pink Minor from a Color Suite. I want to thank you for tuning in tonight and encourage you, if you're interested in live music, which is maybe a thing again soon, like next week soon, please visit my website. I've got lots of actual live in-person concerts coming up soon, and I'd love to see you at one of them. So take care. Here's Madeline Dring.